Welcome to a Wednesday morning wisdom talk in Nowhere Village. I don't even know what the day is. I usually say the day. It's June 17th, 2020. And we have been talking about our values here in Nowhere Village. And today, I actually don't have a huge lecture planned. I'm going to talk a tiny bit here at the top, and then I'm actually going to go into some questions from our community here. And one of my most important values is awareness, which is a form of listening, being able to just see and observe and hear. And so as I've been preparing for this talk this week, especially in a world where every day it feels like there's new information to process, and just everything is changing so rapidly, and there are so many important voices of wisdom to listen to for us to become aware of. It just didn't feel like me, it didn't feel like a day for spouting off a bunch of my own knowledge. And so it's going to be based a lot more on listening today. Okay. We just did an exercise that it was taught to me a long time ago when I first started meditating. It was taught to me about 10 and a half years ago and really changed my life at the time. Sometimes I call it the shadow meditation. Sometimes it's called the 3-2-1 meditation. And it helps us become honest about our triggers with other people. And, we begin by calling in a person who, or just observing a person who we find challenging. And I remember the first time that I did this exercise, there was an inner voice that was saying, the first thing you do is basically make a list of all the things you don't like about this person. Oh man, they're greedy and they're mean and they're impatient, and there was a voice inside my head that wouldn't even let me make the first list, because of as I talked about in last week's talk, this false value of niceness that had been so conditioned into me. There's actually, any outer voice that we internalize from our culture, from our parents, from our upbringing, becomes an internal voice. And I remember right off the bat, I was amazed just to notice for really the first time that this inner editor wouldn't even let me think quote unquote negative thoughts about another person fully. The thing is that the negative feelings were there, strong. I was really, really having a hard time with this person. At the time, it was a boss that I worked with, and I struggled with her every day, but I couldn't even articulate to myself what bothered me about her, let alone to other people. It was all sort of inside. And in the second step, we call them to us and we tell them the list. You're like this. Now that I've done some authentic relating training and authentic communication training, I might put it a little differently. It might be more like, I experience all of these feelings when you do these things. But anyway, it works in the exercise. You just tell them you're like this, and then they go away and you say, I'm like this. I have these pieces. And the point of the work is something that I also talked about in the meditation, for those who want to listen to the playback of that. The point of the work is that once we see that the shadow lives in us as well, which of course for me, there were a few roadblocks before I could admit that. I couldn't even articulate the shadow. I couldn't even, and that again, it's like a, it's like I was playing hide and seek. It's like I was still playing a kid's game, even though I was an adult. I was in my late 20s when I discovered this work. Um, Mid 20s, whatever. I was an adult, but I was still kind of doing this kind of childish thing, which is if I just kind of ignore this, maybe it'll go away, you know? Um, and so there it is, awareness, awareness, awareness. This is the first fundamental quality that is the beginning of setting us free, the beginning of wisdom, the beginning of healing, the beginning of transformation, and the beginning of honoring our values, whatever they may be. While we were exploring fear a couple of weeks ago, the world exploded and shifted once again in a really dramatic way, it feels like. And some of that shift has felt really, actually really positive to me. With the Black Lives Matter movement gaining so much momentum, and in this critical moment where so many of us have had the blinders taken off by all of the challenges of COVID, and so many of us who we got time to keep our eye on things. We've got time to show up and help in this really really interesting context. All of this has arisen. There's also been, of course, a backlash to that movement, and moments where very wise people are asking, are we about to enter a civil war or race war? And this, so while we were discussing fear, all of this was coming up, and I talked at that time about how when we're in a deep fear state, when we're in it, which I was calling a trauma state, but you can play with the language here. All that matters is that we know that there are times in our lives, and all of us experience it, where we're too afraid, we're too agitated, we're too tender, we're too raw to show up for certain things. And that in those moments, I call them triage moments, right? That the idea is to go directly to the wound and to find safety and healing again before we can open up all this other stuff. And that continues, like that's your whole life, right? It's not just when everything's crazy in the world, like anytime. And it comes from your internal measure of when you need to stop and rest and put down the work. And I know some people have reached out who said, I couldn't come to Nowhere Village. I'm sorry, I haven't been there, you know. And I said, of course, you know, it's here for you. It's a sanctuary. It's not going to come running after you if you don't visit it. It's just going to be here, ready, waiting. And you only need to take what you need to take. So, but there was a whole talk that I was going to give then, which I kind of gave in a different way, but it felt like a triage moment and not the time for this kind of more philosophical talk. But there are these two quotes that I was gonna go kind of deep into, and one's from the Isha Upanishad. And in the Isha Upanishad, the unknown author, he says, "He who sees himself in all things and all things in himself knows no fear." And this other quote, which is so similar, from the Heart Sutra, which I did mention that lecture: "Without walls of the mind, and thus without fears, bodhisattvas see through delusions, and finally nirvana." And so I'm bringing this in now, and I'm bringing in this shadow meditation now, because I feel like this is at the heart of how, if we're going to heal as a nation, as a human race, as a planet, and of course, starting with the individual. I believe that this piece is at the center, right? We talked about how fear is what will often keep us from showing up for our values, or it can. We talked about the fear, the war inside, the false stories, and our ego, the kleshas, all the ways that fear shows up. And so all of this is this sort of shadow realm that quite naturally humans don't want to deal with a lot of the time. And these key texts are telling us, these key quotes are telling us that until we're able to acknowledge how these things live inside of us too, the fear will always win. The war will divide not just a nation or a world, but it'll divide me. It'll divide you inside. And when you're divided inside, those walls of the mind, those are our stories, right? Now, there are moments when our stories protect us, or we think they do. And again, it's not always time to be breaking that stuff down. There are times when it's just healing or tender time. You know, we've talked about that a lot. So I don't want to underemphasize that. But when we are ready to start to look and see and break down these walls of the mind, what we're going to find is that once awareness can travel into all of the aspects of your humanness, it will accept what it sees. And acceptance is a very, very deep, true form of love. And so practicing for ourselves awareness and acceptance without needing to even have some great understanding or some great articulation, or to fix it. The more that you can be in that listening space with yourself and with others, the more you can stay in the sort of knowing in a way. We have to stay, the enlightened beings get enlightened by not assuming that they know everything. The walls of the mind are the stories. It's knowledge. False knowledge, but even knowledge that's like true can get in the way of seeing and having what needs to be revealed to us revealed. I'm going to read some questions now. All right. So Lee wanted me to talk more about the transition from discovery and inquiry, right? From these practices that we're kind of doing on our own, meditation and journaling, right? And then how do we take our inquiry around values, our inner work, and put it into action? How do we start manifesting them without clinging to either a sense of righteousness or getting caught up in our own fears? And if we use them to create art, where do we share it? Is the art worthy if it has nowhere to go? You set me up really beautifully there at the end, Lee. If your art has nowhere to go, put it up in Nora Village. That's somewhere for it to go. We would love to see it. So, and I'm seeing new messages to make sure that, yeah. Cool. I'm seeing people coming in with saying, I guess after like me talking for 15 minutes and them kind of processing, some people are answering their own questions. So it's great. Yeah. So I've been thinking about this a lot, Lee, the transition from the inner work to the outer work. And I think she's also referring to, you know, I said like the last step of all of this, because we do all this inner work, the last step is manifesting, is going into the world and taking actions. It's and making art and making offerings, putting things out there, right? This, what I'm doing right now is me manifesting my values for you guys. Whether this talk feels good or not for me has to do with me, you know, understanding it in the context of my values. So, and I will say that's often the hardest part for me is actually making that bridge between my inner work and the outer reality. I get caught in that place a lot. Giving myself a regular schedule to do this it helps me, actually. Otherwise, I get really backed up in my offerings. So I struggle with it as well. And honestly, I think giving yourself permission to spend more time before you manifest is a really, really big one. We live in an instant gratification culture, and giving yourself permission to be working things out, I think, is also really, really important to find the spaces, the audience, and you mentioned it right there, the spaces in the audience that are appropriate. So this may or may not be helpful to hear, but I'm gonna say this. I've been thinking a lot about the spaces in which the spaces that we go for different things. I've been digging up my own shadow. I've been in some places in my shadow that it took me a whole life to get to in this last year too. Really strong work in these last few months. Really hard work. And it's important for me. So this is just an example that might feel less triggering than talking about the race stuff. And so let's see if this is helpful. I have had to learn that there are some dark things that I'm working through, and there are places to discuss that. There's places to bring that, but it's not everywhere. You know, I'll talk about it here in a certain way, but there's a time at which I'm then making somebody else do the emotional labor of holding some of my pain, and especially if some of this is really dark, deep pain, somebody might not be ready to do that at any given moment or prepared. It might not be the best thing for my reality or my world to share. Okay. So, and what I was doing most of my life was, again, like kind of ignoring this stuff or trying to just work it out internally and not having some other space to work it out. And that wasn't working. That wasn't working either. And so one really big piece that I think is tripping a lot of people up right now is the discernment between the right space for talking about our own processing of this stuff versus the public sphere on the one hand, or even like certain relationships that just aren't appropriate. Okay, so now I'm going to tie that into this stuff. So what I've been telling people, and I believe, at least so far, and we'll see if this becomes problematic for members of our community in Nowhere Village, I really believe that Nowhere Village is a safe space for us to just ask these questions, to say the wrong thing and then have someone help us, guide us back to really explore these things and to explore from your own perspective. In the public sphere, I believe I'm big into intersectionality, meaning I believe that the Black Lives Matter movement and the women's movement and the Indigenous peoples movement and the environmental movement and all of these movements that are protecting bodies really go together, and we need to support each other. That being said, we are a rainbow, and each color needs its moment to stand up. And right now, the Black Lives Matter movement needs the mic. They're making amazing things happen, and they need our wind behind them. Those voices need to be amplified. And so one of the things that I'm even learning from, because I'm so often like, oh yeah, no, I agree, I know this, and let me talk about it, right? When so often what needs to happen is actually that passing along. And in this context, it's important that we all have empathy and we all have things coming up for ourselves. That's natural, that's good. But it also means you've got trauma and you've got stuff coming up and challenges coming up. And so getting yourself to the right space to kind of to start talking about it, start working it out, and to start practicing taking action in spaces where we feel safe. Okay, great. So I'm going to go on to another question, but I'm sure we'll loop back around to some of those themes. Thank you, Pam. So what I thought was reality is no longer. And yet I'm feeling more and more like I'm disconnected from others who are trying so hard to make the world like they thought it was. Pulling into those walls of the mind, right, Pam? Anger, wanting to scream. I don't know. I've never had the value of patience, but I feel like I might need patience. I don't really know how. I don't really have much in that department right now. Pam says, I realize now that what I wrote was in reaction to the meditation. I was definitely triggered. Good to see this. Yes. So, Pam, I think it's okay to be with that anger. And while we are a chorus of voices and that we need to be able to pass the mic around depending on what's going on and who's making things happen for all of us. We need, we are also still one. We are also, and so sometimes, and I know you personally too, so some of us are also doing work that is, we are all connected to the collective, all of us, 100%. And then I think there are also some of us that are doing, because of our purpose and our mission in this lifetime, are really tapped into some of the ancestral pain and the ancestral trauma, and maybe more tapped into the collective trauma. And so this has actually been really helpful for me when my challenging emotions come up. And man, I'm in them. I mean, this is the talk I was going to give this morning. I'm not ready to about the move that I just made and about it is a move to honor my values, but it has been very, very humbling. Yeah, I've been going through a really hard time. And something that's been really helpful for me is as one of my teachers called it, the sacred technology of crying. To allow the pain that we're feeling right now, to actually allow ourselves to feel it and go through it and let it be purified. Let it out. Let it be purged. Race is a construct in many ways. And going back to our deepest roots, which still live in our DNA, right? This trauma is all of ours, and we've been holding it in our bodies. And so for me, when the emotions are really strong, rather than going out and expressing it to others, I try to find a way to just really work through it in my own body and heart and mind. Sveta says, here's what I worked with in my inquiry. Value of justice. I found that this is important to me in my work, but I do not always observe them in my family. Sometimes it's easier to force my child to do something. Wow. Thank you for admitting that, right? Another one is abundance. I realize that if you want abundance just for yourself, it's still scarcity. Oh gosh, yes. Sveta, yes, thank you so much. And this is what I mean. This is what I meant to inspire when I started off with the shadow work and the quotes about letting go of the walls of the mind, which essentially is saying, I'm going to let the shadow in, or I'm going to let my awareness out to shadow and to fear. What you're seeing with your relationships with your kids is exactly that, right? And I see it every day. I see it all. I'm looking at it all throughout the day, right? How, oh, I'm not, that's not in alignment with my values. Oh, huh. But if we can see this is the human condition, this is reality. And rather than trying to make it some other way, right, we're seeing this all over. A lot of people really trying to rationalize living outside of their values, or, like basic human values. Make excuses, deflect. Oh, but at least I'm doing better than that person. And what you're doing, Sveta, which is so brave and amazing, is just living by your own litmus, by your own heart, noticing when that's not happening and then contemplating it. You don't have to change right away, but just in that awareness and acceptance. Now, when you can accept yourself, and this goes back to a lot of people's questions about other people and acting in the world. When I can really accept myself, I can accept others. That's why I don't walk through the world with enemies, because there's no inner enemies. And it's not because I am just so perfect and amazing. I'm a human too. It's that whatever arises, I can truly meet with love, including the moment when you're forcing your kid to do something. You can have compassion for that. And then everything softens. And I bet there's a shift in the moment in the relationship too, in that. And then abundance. Oh my gosh, if you want abundance just for yourself, it's still scarcity. I'm going to probably end up speaking a little bit more to that in the near future. Nisargadatta says, what does he say? I'm not going to be able to do the actual quote. It's short, but I can't remember the exact wording. But he says, my friend, you're not alone. You're already not alone. And so anything that you try to grasp for just yourself will never bring you satisfaction. What if you find a quality in the shadow person, but you honestly don't think that you have that quality? Not because of denial, but because you really don't think you have it. I think that's a great question. Oh, and then she follows up. I think I've got it. I was thinking too granular. The question is, what larger value did I feel violated? Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's exactly it, Holly. That's it. Exactly. So something that I feel really, really, it feels really important to me right now is nuance and discernment that that there are these pieces are so complicated, guys. This world is this place is incredible, and there's a lot of, you can zoom in and you can zoom out, and there's a lot going on. As human individuals, right? Like Holly, you have your own sort of makeup, and I have mine, and we really are different. And there are going to be some aspects of my reality that just aren't part of your inner world. They're just not part of your hookup. But what you figured out is values start to get us into something that they should feel, at least our core values should feel so universal that, at least for me, this has been a gift of doing this values work and the shadow work, and they go together, is seeing that any time that a shadow arises, or the fear arises, war, a false story, my ego gets activated. Anytime any of that happens, it is giving me information about my values. And so, and this is what I think this is how I'm gonna wrap this up this morning. So what I've been trying to do is really, really, really see myself as a spokesperson for my values, as a conduit or a channel for these values. And to do my best to take the personal out of it. The personal is useful only insofar as it's the details, it's the outfit, it's we can recognize it, we're aware of it too, we accept it too. But once we see that that these values are true and real and worth standing up for, the ego falls away, the smallness falls away, the I'm like this and he's like this falls away. I believe that everyone's values are actually really at heart the same. The reason why I think it's so darn important for everyone to articulate their values for themselves is because, based on your own personal experience, certain things are going to resonate, certain things are going to be triggers, certain words that I use about my values actually make you go, ew, right? And that's fine, because those are my words and they're for me and they're for the way they make me feel, and the way they return me to truth and love, my core values. So, but I really believe that those in essence are actually the core values of everyone and in every heart of every system. There just might be different words that resonate more, or different ways of looking at it or breaking it down or speaking about it. But the reason why I can show up for truth and love, and this is coming and making me emotional a little bit right now, because I've been on a really big journey these past few weeks, starting to see how some of these false values we're posturing as my real values. The kind of prettiness and luxury of my last place was a stand-in for something deeper, about self-care and like well-being and healthy spaces and beauty, right? But prettiness is not yet beauty, just like niceness is not yet love. And so I've been on this really, really big journey of seeing where I get attached to the false values. And they're always connected to fear, war, ego, and avidya, false stories. I could always find my way back to those through the false values. And then when I return to the real values, if I'm really, really, really honoring those, I trust so deeply that those values will serve everyone, that their abundance is for all, not just for me. And when I believe that, I can find myself, whoever I'm sitting across from, I can accept them. I can have compassion for them. I feel more deeply in my truth than ever. I've been speaking my truth, and in some spaces that in my personal life that have been very, very uncomfortable. Comfort, another really great false value that I used to have. Just make it easy. Just be easy. It's not easy. But the reason that I'm able to stand up and say truth in a way I never have is because the love is balancing. And as I speak the truth, I know that I'm not trying to destroy the person I'm speaking truth to. If I'm trying to destroy anything, it's their falsehood, it's their hatred. But I do that through loving them and being honest with them. The same way I'm going to love and be honest with every single being I meet, period. Sometimes that love looks like, hell no, we don't do that here. That's going to ruin the love and the trust in this space. We're not doing it. Yes, Lee. Yeah, destroying their fear, right? And as long as they're trapped in fear, they can't hear the truth and they can't feel the love. And so absolutely, if we're going around spreading more fear, we're going against our values. Thank you all so much for being here today. I, in honor of my values, have decided I'm going to take 2 weeks off. Not immediately. I'm actually trying to figure it out, probably sometime in July. So coming up soon. And I'm going to figure out what that looks like. I would love if by then maybe a couple of you want to lead, a silent meditation or, get together in some way in my absence, but we'll figure that out as we go, and I'll give you more details as I nail it down. I haven't taken a real day off since my divorce a year ago. So I've just been working so hard to try to make it. And it's time for my deep retreat. And I've got a place to do it. So anyway, and so that's coming up, and I'll let you guys know more, and it'll be a nice opportunity for everyone. I'm going to get everything really nice and organized in Nowhere Village, so it'll be really easy for you guys to go back and go back over everything and catch up before we finish the coordinates in August. Okay. Yeah. Holly, this class today was a tough one, like the class. Oh, thank you for saying I deserve a break. Yeah. Yeah, I hope it's okay. I hope it's all okay. I hope it's sitting with you guys all right. You know that you can always reach out to me individually too, if you need extra support. But yeah, it is. Some of this stuff is tough. And I'm so glad that we can do it together, right? This is where we practice being with the discomfort and learning that we're still held and learning that we're still loved and learning that our values are still stronger than the fear. Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Lee. Lee's been holding some really great space for me all this time. Thank you.